Good morning. Following on from the Diversity Project's annual event, my guests today are two of the five panelists from the C-suite discussion on how to prioritise DE&I in turbulent times, and have kindly agreed to this Q&A session to answer some more questions of the audience. My name is Linda Rossheim and I'm Head of Marketing and one of the board members at the Diversity Project. I'd like to welcome Darren Johnson, COO of Impacts Asset Management and fellow DP board member, as well as Steve Butler, CEO of Punter Southall Aspire. So we only have 30 minutes, so let's get straight into the questions. Steve, can I begin with you, please? One of the questions was, how can other C-suites ensure DE&I is maintained as a long-term strategic priority?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, DE&I is a huge subject, and the C-suite have many things to kind of prioritize, etc. So I can see why someone asked the question, because it's such a huge thing. It's potentially easy to drop off the agenda. However, for me, I see DE&I as about culture. It's about creating a culture within the organization which accommodates a more diverse population within the business and promotes and attracts, etc. So when you think about culture as a regulated individual by the FCA, as the SMF1, I've got a prescribed responsibility for the culture of the business. So it's already up there as a strategic responsibility for me. I spend a good chunk of my time thinking about it. So you should be rest assured that your C-suite is thinking about this. The only thing I would hope to see over time is I think the regulators should turn the heat up on this. It's a prescribed responsibility, but we haven't seen any evidence yet of any organizations that haven't managed their culture and bad things have happened being penalized by the FCA. And I think if they did that would really keep us on our toes.
Agreed. Darren, thoughts on DE&I at firms being voluntary or paid, being a sole job or being attached to existing jobs?
Sorry, getting excited to answer the question. Okay, I think for me it's maybe straightforward, maybe I'm oversimplifying, maybe not, but if it's part of your strategy, your business strategy, then to me, it has to be a paid role. If it's voluntary, it risks being inconsistent, right? And also if it's voluntary and you don't have it in your strategy, then you are inconsistent, and potentially you're not taking it as seriously as you should, or potentially you don't believe in the benefits of diversity, equity and inclusion to your firm and for your people in its entirety. So for me, it should be a paid role. I think it's difficult when it's attached to existing jobs unless it's recognized, and if it's not that, then you're never going to be serious about evolving your culture, as Steve was alluding to, or your business strategy.
Thank you. Steve, how do we do this without alienating white men?
Well, we managed to do it without alienating me, so I guess that's step one. So I personally don't agree with quotas, because that's not how we change the dial. It's very easy to go out with big bucks into the marketplace and hire the diverse set of employees that you want. That doesn't mean you've changed your organization, because if the culture's not right, those people are not going to stay. So I think change starts within an organization. So it's back to our point that's kind of running through these questions. It's about culture. It's about creating a culture that works for everyone, where everyone feels that they belong, where you do attract a broader set of talent into the business, and people stay, and there's opportunity for promotions, etc. So, and if the focus is on inclusivity, that includes our white men as well. It includes everyone. And we often talk about diversity characteristics. We talk less about the intersectionality, and many of us intersect many different characteristics. So I think talking in the round is the only way that we're going to get the right outcome that we want. Except, there are certain groups that we do need to lean into to provide them with the extra support. So I think it's about creating a culture which has that equity in it, but is inclusive for everyone.
Thank you. So Steve, you just mentioned quotas. Darren, a question for you. What is your view on quotas at a department level and on incentivizing hiring managers on this basis? Group targets don't seem to be moving the needle.
So for me, I'm not a big fan, like Steve, of targets or quotas. I think if you're using targets or quotas, it's probably an indication of problems you have in your organization, and you're trying to deal with the symptoms as opposed to get to the root cause. So for me, if you need to have a target, then it says that maybe your recruitment processes are not quite right. Maybe where you're looking for talent isn't holistic enough to capture the talent that might exist in your area, region, country, whatever your business does. So for me, you need to look at the root causes. You need to look at how you develop your pipeline, and then when you develop that pipeline, how you then allow talent to come in, how you look at meritocracy in your organization. I think meritocracy without equity is a problem. So you must look at that and examine your procedures, your processes, and hopefully that will mean that you don't need targets or quotas. Or if something needs to be done, you can be intentional about it and know that, for whatever reason, it's certainly not because of procedures and processes. You haven't got whatever you need for your organization. So you can be more intentional, and actually your business should understand, because otherwise it's hard. So yeah, targets and quotas is a symptom for me of a problem that you may have. Fix the problem first.
Okay, thank you. Steve, question for you, and I know that you've spoken on this at the diversity project before. Do you explicitly use performance measurement tools, annual appraisal process to measure, acknowledge, reward, and prioritise DE&I efforts?
Right, yes. I think any business that has kind of performance management, ongoing appraisals, bonuses linked to objectives, has those things as best practice in their organization. There has, and you have a strategy, there has to be an element of making sure your corporate strategy runs through these objectives and performance management requirements and bonuses, etc. So for me, in our organization, we have a discretionary bonus. It's a very emotional subject within the organization. It's linked to numbers, obviously, because we have to make a profit. But it's also linked to a set of corporate objectives and a set of personal objectives, and those corporate objectives are linked to the strategy. And as I've said, culture is part of the strategy because it's part of my requirements in my role. So that objective or those objectives run through the organization, and everyone will pick up those. Personal objectives, is down to the manager identifying key areas that need to be set objectives for an individual, and I think it's different from individual to individual. I personally, in my C-suite, will have personal objectives which are linked to ED&I. And for example, I had a senior manager in my team who was a skeptic. I introduced reverse mentoring, and I saw in the early days of reverse mentoring, he was kind of skipping his meetings and kind of not taking it seriously. So I made it his objective that he had to do a reverse mentoring meeting every 4 weeks, and I needed to see the records or notes of the meeting, the fact that they'd existed, and that was an objective for him, and therefore represented a proportion of his overall discretionary bonus. So I think you need to use objectives, personal objectives, very carefully, to make sure that you get the outcomes you want. The reality was that individual, once he got into reverse mentoring, loved it and has been the biggest champion about it around. But I needed to use that objective structure and bonus structure to give him that nudge.
Interesting. Darren, one for you. Do our current leaders actually know what works? Which was obviously the theme of the annual event. What should leaders do different from now?
Well, I think thank you for the annual event, because hopefully some leaders that have or watched it or participated have a better understanding as to what works. But I think, you know, leaders don't have all the answers, and I think we should all acknowledge that it's a difficult space, and they don't. But what leaders can do is, of course, continue to educate themselves. I've had to educate myself. I am not a ED&I expert at all. I've chosen to educate myself and try and get knowledge, not just awareness of these issues. I think you need to, you know, role model. So make sure that you are seeking diverse perspectives in your organization. I think that's super important. You know, we talked about strategy. Make sure you have a strategic plan. You know, you should, you know, entwine that into your business case, your business plan. It should include people, and it should include diversity, inclusion, and equity. Lead by example. You know, make sure that you are showing inclusive behaviors, and that's just not necessarily about asking people for their comments in meetings, but it's all the way to making sure your building's accessible. You know, you really need to lead by example, and yeah, again, hold yourself accountable, right? You know, if there are bad behaviors in your organization, you know, you should deal with it. You should show zero tolerance, and show that. And once you do that one act, it will, as Steve again alluded to, it could just change the behavior of your organization, because they know that you as a leader take bad behavior seriously. So do hold yourself accountable for that. And again, as I said earlier, foster a culture of inclusion. You must do that. You know, doing all these things will help. And lastly, make sure you do involve your employees and all your employees. Again, it's very, very important to do that. So these are things that you can do to start things off. No one's expecting you to have all the answers, but you know, some of this stuff is common sense. And if you do that, you'll go a long way.
Thank you. And I do like I like your answer that you gave, especially the educate yourself. I think that's massive, and obviously holding up the mirror to poor behaviour and not allowing it to continue. Steve, over to you. So how do you support staff who fundamentally do not believe that what you are doing is right?
Yeah, this is obviously a touchy subject and an emotional one, and I think it's bigger than the ED&I subject. You know, this is about the values of your organization. We all only want to work for companies, I think, ultimately that match our own values. And I think we've all been in situations where we work for companies and it's just not felt right, and we've made the decision to kind of move on. And I think that plays into this question. You know, if you've set the values as a C-suite, if you set the values of your organization and that's what you want your organization to be, and people are not comfortable with those values, you're going to have to accept that they will move on. And I think this is a natural thing, and it's a good thing. You know, you're only going to build the business that you want if you allow that to happen. And I think pampering to individuals and trying to kind of find kind of ways around them not having to do things because they don't agree with you, it's a short-term fix. You know, if it's not right, it's not right, and let them move on.
Thank you. Darren, how do you as senior leaders continue to motivate and encourage individuals within firms to engage in DE&I activity and vice versa? How do you motivate senior leaders to engage in DE&I as a junior member of staff?
I could probably give a short answer. I think, how do you motivate your staff to do good work? How do you motivate them to help you win? How do you do that? Well, hopefully you do that by holding them accountable. Hopefully you do that by incentivizing them properly. Hopefully you do that by training them and giving them the tools they need to help your business succeed. So for me, leaders should motivate their staff in the same way in DEI, especially if it's part of their business strategy. So it's not really a hard one. And how do I think juniors, I think you said, motivate senior leaders? They shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to. But I would always say that all staff should model the behaviors they want to see. So if your junior staff, keep modeling those behaviors. If you're in a meeting and someone hasn't been asked to speak, why don't you point that out? Just model those behaviors. But I would hope that in a good organization, you wouldn't have to persuade your senior leaders, particularly if it's part of their business strategy.
Thank you. So one question each left. Steve, how do we address performance management in diverse staff when there is a fear that these conversations will lead to allegations of discrimination?
Okay, I can understand why someone asked this question. It's a kind of concern. I think the reality is this isn't a diversity issue. This is a management issue, and the person that's asking the question, I think it's about looking at their or whoever they're talking about management capabilities. Performance management is about communication between a manager and their team member. So it's making sure that the manager is very clear what the expectations are of that manager and of the business, and then collaborating with that team member around how they could convert that into objectives that work to kind of get the right outcome. I think it's then about documenting those objectives and both sides agreeing those, and then coming back and measuring against those objectives. And for the manager to be honest from the get-go if things aren't kind of going in the right direction, and for the manager to then coach and mentor that individual to achieve those objectives. This is all kind of management stuff, and I think if you do that, then there is no concerns about who the individual is or their characteristics. You've done absolutely the right thing to get them to achieve the best they can, and if you can't get them to achieve that, then you've got to look at alternative roles for them.
Darren, over to you for the last question. There are now numerous studies globally that demonstrate the business case for diversity. Why do you think we are still having to convince people that DE&I is a critical part of every decision that companies make?
It's a complex one, I think, this one. I always say that there is an implication to what clever people choose not to know. And it goes back to the knowledge and awareness point. I think some of this is lack of awareness, and people are not taking it seriously. They're not convinced maybe by the numbers or the research for whatever reason. I think there is ingrained biases and mindsets. And as you know, those types of things are really hard to change. There is a fear of change as well. People sometimes see this topic as a zero-sum topic. In other words, I have to replace someone with someone else, and that takes away opportunities from a certain group or certain groups, which isn't necessarily the case. That's all about strategy and how you choose to do things. And sometimes there is a limited understanding of complexity, which I mentioned before, of DEI, I should say. There's a limited understanding of that complexity, and because of the complex nature of it, some people don't want to get into that. They're scared of legalities, they're scared of upsetting people, they're scared of all sorts of things that may or may not happen. And what I always say to that is, look, we are in an industry where we have a lot of smart people. That's why I started off by saying there's an implication to what smart people choose not to know. Because it is a choice, right? It is a choice. And if we all try and educate ourselves, get that knowledge, as we would do for any other business challenge that we believe we needed to get through in order to make our business better or ourselves more competitive, or nowadays to make our regulator happy, we would get on and solve the problem and do it. So I think those are the reasons, but I'm optimistic. I think people do understand now, and thanks to the DP and others, people are getting more educated on this topic. And because there's great organisations like the DP out there, you know, they can be supported to get through, to take advantage of this challenge and opportunity.
Great answer, Darren. So many thanks to both of you for joining me today. We hope that the audience will find the additional Q&A session useful. Thank you both.